We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio, right here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's action-packed show, we'll be speaking the cost of war in both Ukraine and Israel for the American public, the political cost for Joe Biden, and examining what damage the recent guilty pleas from Trump associates will do to Donald Trump himself, if any. It's going to be a great show, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with you. I'd like to take a moment to wish a fond hello to our listeners out in Chester Springs, Philadelphia on WFYL 1180 AM. Thank you for being here. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com. You can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Let's get started. Israel at war, the United States deeply involved. Now, there's a cost in human life, there's a cost in cash, and of course, there's a political cost. Now, to discuss that political cost specifically to Mr. President Joe Biden, we're joined by longtime host of this here radio show and LibertyNation.com's senior political analyst, Mr. Tim Donner. Thanks for coming in, Tim.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
So, Tim, you wrote a fantastic article on how this, how the war in Israel is really impacting Joe Biden. I think that's important for everybody to understand. There's some historical perspectives on that. Can you give us your overall take, please?
Well, I think that Joe Biden has become a de facto wartime president, even though the United States is not committed on the ground to either the conflict in Ukraine or in Israel. Biden essentially has to spend a great deal of his time trying to figure out how the U.S. can aid Israel without getting involved in a ground war by putting troops literally on the battleground. And I think if he stops short of that, he will have a very different equation than if he feels he has to commit U.S. ground troops. That's always been the sort of Rubicon that has not been crossed yet. But if it is, of course, it's going to be a huge problem. And I think the biggest problem that Biden has with this war politically is the contrast that it strikes to his predecessor. During Donald Trump's 4 years in office, the bad actors in the world were mostly, almost entirely contained. He was the only president of the 21st century that saw no new foreign wars under his presidency. He basically had quieted the Middle East. He had put Putin back in his box. He had engaged the North Koreans. He had essentially distracted the Chinese with trade talks. And that contrast of a world at peace, it stands in really stark contrast to what Joe Biden is dealing with now. And Joe Biden will have to answer one question that I don't think he can answer, which is, what is it about your presidency that makes the bad actors in the world want to act up and begin wars when they didn't with Donald Trump? It's going to be that exact head-to-head comparison, I think, that's going to stand really not to benefit Joe Biden, to say the least. Now, he could. There's always an opportunity that you can become a wartime president who makes good decisions and helps to bring peace. I don't think anybody believes that Joe Biden is that president, and he's got so many difficult decisions to make. He's trying to hold Israel back from a full-on ground assault on the Gaza Strip, whereas I think the Israelis are chomping at the bit to go at it. So he's got a million hard decisions ahead of him as essentially a wartime president. I don't see him benefiting from it at all. In fact, I see that this will be a major issue used against him in 2024.
Well, his supporters who support him no matter what, really,
Right.
The $200,000 check from his brother Jim Biden right after closing a deal. Well, it just shows that Biden's pay their debts. That was that was a tweet by Is it George Takei, formerly of Star Trek?
Right. Nothing to see here. Just
nothing to see here.
Simple loan from his brother, interest-free, which just happened to be the exact amount of a $200,000 payoff.
Now, with this, let's get back to the topic at hand. That's a rabbit hole that we'll save for another time.
Yes, I agree.
So really, being a wartime president, it should come with a huge amount of bonuses because it allows you to demonstrate your competence. It allows you to mobilize the full mechanics of government. It allows you to appear a king on foreign policy stage, especially if you're in a very unique position that Joe Biden is in, that your country's not actually at war. This should be all upside for Joe Biden, but it's not because there doesn't seem to be an end in sight, does there? We've had $100 billion in cash, weapons, blah, 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 going to Ukraine. You've had Joe Biden promising a blank check in terms of support for Ukraine. And yet in the year since the $100 billion has gone, the war hasn't moved in any one noticeable way or another. So essentially, Joe Biden's big gesture here in terms of Ukraine was, we are going to fund you. We're going to fund the hell out of you so you can defeat this enemy. And nothing's changed.
That's because there's no end game. In other words, we can't.
Brings us perfectly onto Israel.
Yes, exactly. He doesn't know what his end game is there either, except I'm sure Biden would be happy to have Hamas wiped off the face of the earth. But then another group will form, just like they did with ISIS. You can wipe out this particular organization, but it does not wipe out the mindset behind it. Yeah, I mean, as a wartime president, you do have opportunities, but you cannot enter a war without an end game, without a goal that you set for your either occupation or participation in a war. And I think people don't have any sense, and it's making them queasy. What is the end game in Ukraine? And what's the end game going to be in Israel? Because, you know, once you get Iran involved, okay, and he's been playing footsie, Biden, with Iran, just like
the
Barack
Iran
Obama
deal,
did.
Yeah.
And so Obama didn't pay a direct political price for that, but Biden will. Because as much as they want to claim that the $6 billion that they sent to Iran was for strictly humanitarian purposes, which they can't even confirm. And even if it was, then that's $6 million offset against something they were already planning to do. So he has a Herculean task ahead of him just to prevent Iran from getting involved in the war. But maybe now we can see in this teachable moment that mollifying an evil adversary or enemy like Iran doesn't work. Strength is the only thing that prevents war. Weakness promotes war, and strength promotes peace. Ronald Reagan taught us that, and so did Donald Trump.
You use the word mollify. I think appeasement is
appeasement is the old word. Neville Chamberlain.
Very, very much so. And as Churchill famously noted, appeasement is when you feed the crocodile in the hopes that it will eat you last. Now, we're going to be back with Tim Donner after this short break discussing other foibles facing President Joe Biden. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are LibertyNation.com.